Idaho 4, A Convict's Thoughts with ARHayes. Let's jump right into it. We're going to talk shock, lies, and an arrest. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be my perspective from the very beginning of this actual crime, the Idaho 4, from the minute that it broke on the news up until an actual arrest took place. This is going to be part 1 of 3, so go and look out for the other 2. I'm going to try to do them back to back and get them posted up as quick as I possibly can. Part 1, the shock. When the news broke, I think everybody just shook their head in disbelief. 4 college students, young adults, lives taken just off of a major university campus in the middle of the night on big game weekend. I don't think any of us could have really put everything in our minds together at that point. Me, even coming from the background that I've been through, looked down at the floor, shook my head, and I was in disbelief, and then it really hit me. How sad is this? How painful this is going to be for so many. Not only the families, the victims' families, but then even the community. This is a complete shocker to everybody in that entire community. Then as I followed, and I didn't speak to many people about it. My wife was never a real true crime buff, and she sure as heck doesn't watch the news. She's not a political type person. She's not monitoring the everyday happenings in the world because she's more focused on living each and every day positively, loving our dogs, traveling as much as possible. She lives outside of the whole negative thought process of it all. So I didn't really discuss it with her, but I kept checking in. I kept watching. Then the press conferences started, and I actually became angry right away. And a lot of people are going to look at me and say, well, why would you be angry? Why wouldn't you be sad? I was angry because of the lying. So I went from shock value of learning of the crime and the loss of the 4 young lives to, why is law enforcement lying on the very first press conference? The man that stood before the microphone looked as if he was a deer in the headlights. He didn't know what to say, how to say what he wanted to say. He was lost. He was lost. And it continued, and nothing ever came into effect to slow down the fact that what he was speaking was not at all coming across as plausible or honest. For most of us that have been around the crime block for a long time, I believe every single one of us could see right through what was happening. They were feeding garbage information, and they were hiding the fact their arms were twisted. They had no idea what had transpired. As we watched, the FBI was quickly into the mix. The state police department was quickly into the mix. But as everything got laid out, we realized nobody was quickly into the mix, all due to the fact a 911 call hadn't been made for 8 hours. And then even when that 911 call was made, nobody took it as seriously on the force. Why can I say that? Well, the main man within law enforcement that would be overseeing this actual crime scene didn't show up for 4 to 5 hours after the initial arrival of police. The coroner did not show up for an additional 4 or 5 hours from the call to 911, meaning the key important cogs to ensuring the crime scene was locked down and safe were nowhere to be found. They were not there. The bodies were not being examined. The key evidence was being trampled upon, not only by the first responders and probably the officers trying to secure the crime scene with no actual capability of doing so, But it even got worse because then we learned, I guess we learned later down the road that the kids had been summoned prior to the 911 call and had been in and out of the house as well. So before we get to all that, we got to just start with the investigation of law enforcement, because that's what this video is about. The lying began immediately. The hiding began immediately. What about this crime scene put enough fear to stall the actual law enforcement from releasing key and honest factual facts to this case, evidence? They didn't do it from the get-go, which really makes me scratch my head today. But even back then, when I was catching all these press conferences, finally I had to bring my wife into the loop, and I just shook my head and I said, I need your help, because I know you don't care about true crime, but I need you to ensure that I'm thinking on a correct manner, because maybe I've gone a little bit crazy in my years of lockup, but I need to know I'm not this crazy. So she would sit and listen to me speak upon it, and she shook her head and said, they're hiding something. You're not wrong. Something's being hidden. Something's being lied about. And I kept grasping to figure out what that was and why it was happening. So I'd watch more and more press conferences. Then comes information on the bolo of the car. Not once did they actually show a still shot or a picture or anything in regards to the actual vehicle they were looking for. Now, this confuses me, because most times when law enforcement or somebody is looking for a said vehicle, they put out the information on that vehicle, the license plate number, which in this case, okay, they say they don't have it. Well, there's a check mark in the wrong direction for law enforcement right there, because I know in my mind it's going to be hard, very hard, to distinguish what car is which and what's going on. Well, they spoke upon, that it was a certain type of car, years, make, color. So everything seemed to be on the up and up, that they were releasing what type of car they were looking for, but they still did not release anything showing said car, which right then and there in the back of my mind, I had to just think. And then I actually spilled it to my wife, and I said, they don't have good enough footage or picture to show the actual vehicle that they're deeming is involved in this crime. She looked at me and she said, what do you mean? I said, well, they put out a investigative bolo on a vehicle and saying they want to talk to the occupant or occupants of said vehicle. And she shook her head and said, well, it's not going to be the right vehicle. Oh, where'd you come up with that? I'm telling you what they're looking for. She said, well, they don't have any information on that vehicle. They don't have what it takes to actually make that a part of the crime. They can't even tell you where the car's from. They can't tell you who's in it. They won't even show you a picture of it. And I nodded my head, and I took everything she said to heart, and I didn't really discuss it much, but I knew exactly what she was saying. So I listened some more, and then the questions started arising about the two young ladies that were fortunate to be alive at the end of the occurrence. And again, I was stumped. 2 people survived this. 4 people lost their lives in one home, and 2 people survived. I don't get it. I don't get that. So again, I went back to my faithful wife, who was probably by now shaking her head saying, please God, stop talking to me about this. I don't care. I care that people lost their lives, but I don't want to hear you telling me the whole story. And that's when I looked at her and said, I don't know the whole story, but I need you to make sure I'm not going crazy. Again, Albert, are you serious? What now? And I said, 2 people out of a 6-person residence survived. And she looked at me and she said, what? I said, 2 people are alive. Were they attacked? No, it doesn't seem like they were. It's being said they slept through it. She goes, Albert, come on, you have far more common sense than that. You know they didn't sleep through it. What type of weapon was used, Albert? And I said, I don't know. They haven't really clearly stated, but they said that they were stab and slashing wounds. So 4 people, Albert, got murdered with a weapon that's like a knife, and 2 people survived. And you've already told me 911 wasn't called for 8 hours. So how's that even possible? Honey, I don't know. They must not have woke up. They must have slept right through it. She looked at me and shook her head and goes, yeah, you don't sleep through that, Albert. You don't. Wow. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. You really wouldn't sleep through that. Okay, thanks, honey. I appreciate it. So I went back to, just thinking about the case. And then obviously the Facebook crime groups started popping up. So I started engaging in them. I dabbled. I didn't have any of my own, but I dabbled with some people. I'd listen to their theories and thoughts, and everybody had rumblings of who they thought were involved in this crime. So I started doing a little due diligence into the matter to try to figure out who the players in the area were. And that time, we didn't have a lot of information. We had the ex-boyfriend, we had the fraternity, we had the people in the field that were being, talked to by the police officers in regards to underage drinking, and that all seemed odd, and things started playing out a little bit. Then, of course, I see Ian and Harsh on different things speaking in regards to the crime, and I shook my head, and none of that even made sense to me. But what I could tell is he had knowledge even before he should have had knowledge. So I kind of compartmentalized that, and I probably said that word wrong. It's getting late now, Xander's down here playing with my shoelace. But so I put that in the back of my mind, and I said, okay, I'm going to save that for later. I'm sure I'm going to have some key thoughts on that individual. But I continued to watch the press conferences, and I continued to read and listen to what everybody had to say from the outside version as well. As the officers kept playing this out, they weren't giving up any information at all. They were literally hiding information. They were lying to the public. They were lying not only to all of us on national TV that were tuning in with such interest that we hoped that this type of crime could be solved quickly and justice could be handed down, but they were keeping the local community and the surrounding communities, because this not only affected just U of I campus, but this was Pullman and the Washington State campus, and it went through the 2 states rampantly. People were on edge. They were worried, and these officers were doing nothing to settle anything in anybody's mind. At 1 minute, they're stating that the house was targeted. Then they're stating that the kids in the house were targeted. Then they went back to the house was targeted. Then they said nobody was targeted. Everybody's safe. How can you say anybody's safe if you don't even have a suspect on your radar? And we'll get to that in a second, too, because isn't that just crazy? But they don't have any suspect, but the whole community is completely safe. Now we're moving through it, and a lot of people are taking heat through the online community. We're talking about the ex-boyfriends taking heat, the bartenders taking heat, the hoodie man that walked them from, the bar to the grub trucks taking heat, the DoorDash drivers taking heat. Everybody's taking heat. Everybody's a damn suspect. And what does Ali do to nullify any of it? All they did was come out and say that they've actually nullified a bunch of these people as suspects. They're free and clear. They have nothing to do with it. How? How is that even true? And ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, there is no gag order. You can speak freely about this case. You have 3 major entities working on the case. Nothing. Some of us started gathering little tidbits, whether it be through leaks or whatnot, or just assumptions that it was a K-bar knife. Then people started stating that there was possibly a sheath at the scene, all because there's a portrayer of somebody online giving out details that everybody believes could be a potential part of the actual case. Papa Rogers just started talking. So that kind of caught my eye, and everybody's saying it's a potential this or a potential that, even getting him shut down on Facebook. And in the back of my head, I had to go back to my wife. I said, honey, LE is playing a game. Well, yeah, Albert, you've been saying that since the start. All the stuff you come talk to me, they're playing a game. I said, no, honey, it's deeper than that. She goes, what do you mean? I said, they're releasing info through a fake account on Facebook, and they're getting people riled up and discussing the case within these Facebook groups. And she looked at me and she goes, Albert, you know they do that all the time. Yeah, you're right, honey, I know it. They do. They go fishing, whether it be, for child, the word, the M word that goes with child. They tried to bring them out of the woodworks to get them to tell on themselves, and they do that through fake accounts. So it makes sense. So, okay, cool. In my mind, I always thought from the very beginning, this is not a single individual crime, because so many people were discussing the fact it had to be a serial killer on the move. It was somebody that was very determined and also experienced what they do. And it did make a lot of sense to me that this was a person that was very experienced. Very experienced. To handle 4 people, if you're a single individual, you're very experienced. And if it's more than one person, which was my opinion, more than one person, you still had to be experienced, because you escaped the actual crime scene and people were having to look for you without providing very strong evidence through the public eye to help capture you. I looked at the fraternity. I looked directly at them and I said, look, there's some big stuff there. You heard the rumblings of the arguments, and then the issue with the Ludlow suicide and the hazing through fraternities, and then you heard about some past lives that had been deemed as suicides as well. And it's all coming back to the fraternities. Then I started learning about some of the individuals within those fraternities, and I really started pinpointing on a set of them, too, that made a lot of sense to me. Both of them, first name David. They just made sense to me. And that they're still heavily on my radar, and I'll explain to you why later. But we're working through this now. So all of a sudden the picture comes out from a gas station that the officers use as their actual description of the car. It's not a good picture at all, and when many actually enhanced it, it looked fake. But you got this weirdness of an overnight person working at a gas station that's supposedly a manager, going back, looking through all this film, because at the time it doesn't seem like the officers were even seeking any type of audio or video. It was stated early on that the Gonzalez family's other daughter had to go out and get video for them. There's some great investigating, going right back to the fact I continuously looked at the crime scene photos, and the trash sitting right on the back porch never even got looked at, as if they had their whole eyes on certain things that I guess rang as evidence to them, but they didn't want to look at everything else. It's crazy to me. It's crazy. They kept putting out this portrayal that everybody was asleep when the crime happened, and I had kind of a major issue with that, because if that was the case, and I'm investigating and looking at your crime scene photos, if everybody was asleep in their bedrooms, why were there photos being taken of evidence being looked at just underneath the good vibes sign in the living room? And people would say, well, that's all because of the footprints of the blood and the handprints of the blood, and probably blood everywhere from the knife being walked through the crime scene and the suspects. And we'll get back to that and why now that really doesn't make sense. And I'm sure some of you are already pinging it in your head. They're investigating the living room, but everybody was asleep in their bedrooms. And we know via the PCA that came out later Ooh, what tracks are you looking for blood-wise through the living room? Because it doesn't sound like there were many. Anyways, jumped ahead of myself. Out of the blue, out of all of this, we get a press conference with a main LE member that is just jovial and laughing like the actual negativity of this case, the pain of the case, had suddenly evaporated because he had the big announcement they caught somebody. What are you laughing about when we've all just watched you drive a U-Haul away from an active crime scene saying that you need to get the property back to the families because it's going to help them through this? How does returning property from a crime scene help people get through the devastation of losing their children? And when is it that LE pulls up to a crime scene with the U-Haul to gather said evidence that was never probably processed, was never probably investigated? You just load it into a U-Haul to return it to said families. LE returns evidence from crime scenes? Since when? Since when? But okay, we'll go with it. I mean, this is Moscow, Idaho. We don't have to follow the rules, Idaho. We'll just do things how we feel they need to be done. Things started to rumble a little bit. I mean, people were going berserk about the 8-hour difference between the crime and the call into authorities. But then, hey, miraculously, you know what? They find the exact model car that they are looking for, wrecked and just abandoned in one state over in Oregon, with license plates and everything missing. It's on national TV. You got YouTubers, you got everybody out there looking at it. Never once did any law enforcement from Idaho go to investigate the said car. It was never roped off. It was never protected from anybody touching it, mingling with it. It was just deemed non-existent. It didn't matter. That was not the vehicle they were looking for. Again, I sat there stumped because the minute they found that car, my mind was racing, saying they got it. They got the car. They got the car. They're going to get some evidence. They got the car. The exact make, model, and years, they got it. No, that wasn't it. They never even went to take a look. It didn't matter to them. Did not matter to them at all. Wow, that's different. Even considering the car comes back to the owners of the home where the crime actually lived in, that had sold it to somebody else. But none of that makes any sense. Common sense from the very beginning in this actual crime got thrown out on so many different fronts, and then people want to point at me and say, you have no common sense. Well, shit, I can pinpoint all the stuff in this case you all are missing. Don't tell me I don't have common sense. I have a lot of common sense, especially considering my past, my stupidity in committing crimes. You don't think I learned what to look for? Of course I did. I knew what evidence was important and what wasn't. Was I good enough to hide my own evidence? No, I got caught on many cases because I wasn't smart enough to not leave evidence. But I sure knew what evidence they were looking for. I knew when I was busted, ladies and gentlemen. I knew it. Just odd that a major piece of evidence like that doesn't even get looked at, and it's all tied right back to the home. Online people were drilling that. Then the PCA. An arrest is made. We don't have a lot of knowledge on who it is, why it is, and little trickles of stuff come out. And we watch them again standing as excited as possible behind the podium. They got their man. This is it. Trying to convince everybody that they've sealed the deal. It's a solved crime. Shook my head. Screamed BS. My wife even came in and said, oh God, here we go. They're pinning it on somebody. They're not even going to look for everything else that's involved in this. It's just going to be a sealed deal. Yeah, she's been around the block, ladies and gentlemen. She's been with me. She's seen me get railroaded. She knows a good case. She knows good investigative skills. Just because she's not always interested in studying it or listening to it, she's a pretty smart woman, very honest woman, and could tell when something's not right. So I wasn't going bat crazy because she agreed with some of the things I was thinking. They extradite the young man back. We start the court process. The PCA, the probable cause affidavit, comes out, and we all get to see it for the first time. The holy grail of why this guy's guilty in many people's opinions. I read that and just about threw up. Can't you write a good probable cause affidavit? You got to base it off cell phone pings that the majority of cases in this country won't even allow in. You got to build a stalker theme right from the get-go with no evidence to back it whatsoever. You've arrested a gentleman that's literally lived in the area of the crime for 3-4 months at the most, in a PhD student program, doesn't have the means to even really take time to go make a lot of friends, and nobody's even deemed that he tried. But yeah, he's a stalker. He's a crazy man. And you have him arrested, and you throw out this PCA that it's based off of pings that create a movement of a vehicle. And here's where I have an issue. Got my first major issue. You specified this entire route that this car has moved, and even what time and when he turned off his phone, and you have all of this stuff back. I mean, you've been investigating this guy for a minute. None of that's confirmed truth as of yet, ladies and gentlemen. This is the probable cause. They haven't even got the full results back on all this stuff they're clarifying, but people have taken it as holy grail. My biggest issue, you have all these said sightings of this car on video. Different times from when he left his apartment to the point he arrives back at his apartment. And you based all of this off cell phone pings and what you state you've caught on camera. Yet you can't release one picture, not one, of that car in the area. Not one. Don't tell me you have good video evidence if you can't release one still frame from it in your investigation. Don't say that. I've been through enough of them. I know when you got the car on camera, when you got that picture, you release that bad boy so everybody sees it. You don't have it. You don't have it. You got grainy video or something that does not distinguish this man's vehicle in the area. But you're going to claim it. You will claim it. Especially utilizing cell phone towers that you can't even triangulate because they're not in the proper sequence and can't even give you a proper cast assumption on these cell phone pings, which is why we've gone so long into the case that you haven't even been able to get that information out. I watched this to the point this man's arrested, and nothing about it adds up, even early. And trust me, we all want an early, quick arrest because we want justice for the actual people that lost their lives. We want justice. We want this to be solved. Even the true crime people want it to get solved because it's exciting when it all comes together. Yet true crime people, they have to shake their head and say, none of this makes sense. That's not an exciting thought. That's when people dive in deeper and go, why does it not make sense? And what can come together to make this make sense? In the PCA, we learned that there is a sheath left at the crime scene that's found on the second walkthrough, hours upon hours after the initial walkthrough. that they claim has DNA on it. Very odd place to be found, in my opinion. I mean, many will argue with that, but I feel as though the way it was found and the way it was written into the PCA was a very hidden manner. It concealed the fact that it left open an open door for conspiracy, and they wanted to shut that down. But they opened the door themselves by stating that it was found hours later from a visual look from the doorway. Meaning that the initial people that had to have gone in to that room to even check on said victims, ensuring that they had passed, did not see it up close and personal. It was seen hours later from a doorway, not from up close inspection of the bodies to ensure they had passed. Then we got an eyewitness, ladies and gentlemen. A surviving eyewitness that opened her door numerous times to finally see the said intruder leaving the premises and clad in black, bushy eyebrows, just walking past her and out the back door. Not a word of any type of weapon with him. Not a word of, man, this guy looks scary as all daylight. This guy put fear into me. He looked like he just committed a quadruple homicide. No, he just kind of walked out casually out the back door, leaving a latent footprint right in front of her door. I'm not sure how he could possibly leave a latent footprint while walking out the back door, but evidently that's what they claim to be in the PCA. Then they state he came back to the crime scene the next day and then returned to his apartment and later went to Albertsons. So I just common sensely try to say, okay, well, law enforcement has to be put together a pretty good case, otherwise they wouldn't have arrested the guy, gone across country to extradite him on a no-knock warrant where they kicked in all the doors and they destroyed the family's home. They fly him back immediately on a little charter flight to get him into said custody and get him in for arraignment. So they got to be doing some due diligence. They got to have something that more than what I've seen in this PCA. They've got to. I mean, this is just, it's crazy to me. And here's where, we'll part ways in video one, is I want to keep these shorter for you to be able to thought process everything that's being said as I relay to you my thoughts, my opinions on this case. Within minutes of learning of the initial arrest, I felt it was not the whole story. Meaning, they either did not have the correct person, or they were missing many more from said arrest, and more would be coming. My common sense told me that PCA was so bad, they have to have a bombshell that would come out quickly to settle everybody's mind that they got the right person, especially for the local community. They've got to settle that immediately. It's got to happen. They got to have a bombshell. Very near future press conference has got to drop a bomb that they got this man. But I knew right away, through the lies and the hiding of evidence and the actual blanketing of the entire community from learning what the actual truth was and what they were doing, they were not on a good course for this case. Meaning, they didn't either have enough evidence to figure out what the heck was going on, or they didn't know how to use said evidence, or right from the front, they already knew they contaminated the crime scene so badly, none of it was going to matter anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, the Convict's Thoughts, ARHayes. We're just getting started. More videos to back right behind this one. I'm just laying it out to you. This all started on the wrong foot. Dishonesty is something I know very well because I utilized it in my younger years of life to get in and out of things. Law enforcement in this case, they're utilizing it as well. Talk to you soon. Convict's Thoughts, ARHayes.